He brought it up in conversation, asked if I had heard about the murders, and which I did, and then he said, yeah, it seems like they have no leads. It seems like it was a crime of passion. It was a crime of passion.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Coffee with Crime podcast. I'm Brittany, and today I'm going to be talking all about the case against Bryan Kohberger and the quadruple homicide that happened back in November 2022 in Moscow, Idaho. And I did, when I say a deep dive, I mean a deep dive into this case, specifically Bryan Kohberger. There was so much to sift through, and I have been just fascinated with this case. I actually started following it back when it happened, when the case broke in November 2022, but when I decided that I wanted to do an episode, I really found myself going deep down the rabbit hole. Of course, I need to say that before we get into today's episode, everything that I'm going to be talking about with you guys has been pulled from very public sources, and of course sprinkled in with my own personal opinions. I do always recommend that you do your own research and form your own opinions. Also, currently, although Bryan Kohberger is in jail and being held without bond, he has not been charged with these murders. As of now, he is innocent until proven guilty, and everything is alleged. So just keep that in mind. As of now, I do fully believe that everyone deserves a fair trial, regardless of what we think, and he is innocent until proven guilty. And it looks like the actual trial won't be happening until later in 2025, so we've got some time to talk about it. But yeah, I have so much to go over with you guys. It's going to be a bit of a longer video, so definitely grab a drink, coffee, tea, water, whatever your choice is. I have my iced coffee here. Yes, I drink it out of my Stanley. I know typically people drink water out of their Stanley, but no, I have iced coffee there. But yeah, it's going to be a long one. So grab a drink, get comfortable, because we have lots to go over. And don't forget to, if you're into this type of thing like I am, then definitely subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. But okay, let's just get into today's content. So on November 13th, 2022, the story of a quadruple homicide in small town of Moscow, Idaho, would essentially sweep the nation. So there were 4 students involved from the University of Idaho. There was Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, and they were found brutally murdered in what was described as a bloodbath. Their bodies were discovered in a known party house, the address being 1122 King Road, near the Moscow, Idaho campus, where 2 of the students were currently living. That would be 21-year-old Maddie Mogen and 20-year-old Xana Kernodle. They did currently live within the house. However, 21-year-old Kaylee Gonzalez, she was only visiting at the time. She did live there previously, but was no longer living at that residence and was only visiting. And then Ethan Chapin, he stayed there very frequently because he was dating Xana Kernodle, but he did not technically live within the home. And then there were actually 2 other students that did live in the home as well, but they were left untouched during the homicide, and that would be Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. Initially, they didn't release their names, but now we know, their names, and we have faces to the names. So rumors and theories immediately took off because the public really didn't know much of what was going on. And so obviously people then start talking and speculating. There was talk of whether or not it was a drug deal gone bad. Did the 2 surviving roommates have something to do with it? Everyone wanted to know who was responsible for this brutal murder. So 4 days after the homicide, on November 17th, autopsies were conducted, and it was determined that all 4 of the victims were stabbed multiple times, ultimately causing their death. And at the time, it was believed that all 4 were likely asleep during the attack, and there was no evidence of any kind of sexual assault. And then after the autopsies released, it really did seem like time was going pretty slowly no leads were being made, or at least being released to the public. And so the public understandably was growing very scared, frustrated, and even more than the public, of course, were the families. The families of the victims were feeling obviously very defeated, frustrated, of course, heartbroken. They had just lost their loved ones, their children. But there was stuff going on behind the scenes that the public and the families didn't know about. And it wasn't really until December 7th, 2022, when the first actual big lead was released to the public. And that was giving the public something to be on the lookout for. And we all know this as the white Hyundai Elantra. That was the car in question surrounding the crimes. And so now the public had something to be on the lookout for. So yeah, behind the scenes, it really seemed like the authorities definitely knew a lot more details to the case than they were letting on, than the public was aware of. And that definitely remains the theme throughout this entire case thus far. With the gag order, there's a lot of stuff, I'm sure, a ton of details that we don't know. I'm sure we only know just like a tip of the iceberg. And it can be very frustrating, not only for the public, that's not as big of a concern, but obviously the families of the victims. It can be very, very frustrating when you feel like you're left in the dark. I can only imagine. I've never actually been in that position, but I can only imagine it's very frustrating for them and just very disheartening. But I do believe that there is a reason, of course, to protecting so many details, and that's just protecting the integrity of the case. So that way, when it comes time to charge whoever, as of now, of course, Bryan Kohberger, they have a slam shut case. And so, yeah, so a lot of details I really believe we don't know. I believe there's going to be a lot more that comes out when we finally do go to trial, which we know we've got some time. And then on December 30th, 2022, so this is 47 days after the homicides took place, perhaps the biggest breakthrough of all, of course, would be the arrest. And we all know the name. The arrest was made of one sole perpetrator, and that would be Bryan Kohberger. And obviously, people were talking. Everybody was talking. Who is Bryan Kohberger? How is only one guy responsible for this? And especially if you add on the layers of the fact that he was going for his PhD in criminology, it was just such a crazy situation. And everyone wanted to know, who is Bryan Kohberger? And so a lot of this video today is going to be focusing on just that. We're going to be doing a huge deep dive into Bryan Kohberger, and there's just so much interesting stuff that we're going to uncover. So Bryan Christopher Kohberger, he was born on November 21st, 1994 in the city of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and his parents are Michael and Marianne Kohberger. So his father, Michael, he was a maintenance worker for the Pleasant Valley School District. His mother, Marianne, also worked for the same school district. She worked as a parapro for children that have special education needs. And then he also had two older sisters. So there's Melissa and Amanda. So Melissa, she's a mental health therapist, shockingly enough, and Amanda, a counselor. And also, oddly enough too, Amanda was a one-time actor. She starred in a pretty unknown film, I would say. It was titled 2 Days Back. This was back in 2011. Oddly enough, it's like a thrasher film where college students are being killed off. And so a lot of people say that maybe he got ideas from this. I don't know. Maybe. It is odd. It is odd. Obviously, his family is, especially his sisters are very involved in the mental health realm. And so it does paint an interesting picture, being that we now know that at least Bryan Kohberger is being considered as the perpetrator for this horrific quadruple homicide. And yeah, so from what I can see, it looks like Bryan's parents might have both lost their jobs working for the Pleasant Valley School District. I can see why, having the Kohberger name in the school with children would not be ideal. Families, I can see having problems with it. But also, it's just sad to me. I think that, they are victims in this too. I cannot imagine, as a parent myself, I just can't fathom what they're going through. Not only the heartbreak of watching, your child go through this and maybe accepting what your child possibly did, but then, of course, just losing their jobs and getting all the backlash. I'm sure it's been horrible for them. And I think that they're victims in this too. And I kind of feel really bad for his parents. But yeah, so back to Bryan. It looks like Bryan has struggled with mental health problems for a very long time. And we actually have, a lot of documentation, much of which was by Bryan himself. But it looks like, he struggled with, we know, severe OCD. He struggled with substance abuse. Specifically, he had an addiction problem with H. So in his teen years, that's, obviously a very, very serious drug. And then just looking like a lot of possibly other mental health disorders. I'm not sure if he was diagnosed with any of these, but looking at some of his writings that I'm going to go over with you guys right now, it looks like he could have had some other stuff going on. Maybe he was diagnosed. Maybe we don't know everything. Maybe this was just creative writing by Bryan, but, it's pretty dark stuff. And I think it's really telling of the type of person that Bryan is. So in 2011, just before Bryan turned 17 years old, he wrote a pretty eerie post on a forum called Tapatalk. I had never heard of this before, but apparently it was a thing. And so the post, it's clearly written, by a young man that's struggling with mental health, with their self-worth. And, I debated about reading it in its entirety, but I do think it's really worth taking the time to listen to, because it's really telling either how mentally ill Bryan was or is, or just, how he was at least feeling. So the first post that I'm going to read by Bryan, allegedly, goes like this. I have had this horrible depersonalization go on in my life for almost 2 years. I often find myself making simple human interactions, but it is as if I am playing a role, playing a game such as Oblivion. I can see what is going on. I am slightly into it, but I can pause the game and focus on my real life. In this case, my life is the game, and my old self can be reached by pausing the game. But how? I often think of things that humans do, things I have done my whole life. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth, as I am starting to view everyone as this. Everything I have ever done makes no sense. How did things get this way? How am I wearing this shirt? And who decided that humans should wear shirts like this at all? Are we all just advanced animals with possession, or is there more? More that I can't see. I can't connect. I view everything as I would if I was playing Oblivion, pointless and full of nothing, out of reality. I am moving out of my house. My last holidays were already lived, but where was I? As my family group hugs and celebrates, I am stuck in this void of nothing, feeling completely no emotion, feeling nothing. I feel dirty, like there is dirt inside of my head, my mind. I am always dizzy and confused. I feel no self-worth. I am intelligent, but I feel the opposite. I say things I don't mean. The last holiday in my house, the house I grew up in, the house I once contributed to, the house I once felt at home in, is past. As I hug my family, I look into their faces and I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less. I feel less than mentally damaged. It is like I have severe brain damage. I am stuck in the depths of my mind where I have to constantly battle my demons. Am I here or am I fake? I feel myself slipping away. I hear screams faintly, but I constantly battle away from it. What if I let go? Where would I be? Would I ever come back to reality? I try to remember where I originated from, but I can't. I barely remember my childhood. I often fear being 80 years old, alone, and having faint memories of my parents. Everything I missed out on. I think about my father and what a good man he is. How I treat him like dirt because I have this condition and I can't take it. I might spiral out of control and lose myself in the void. I can't let it all go. All of these regrets I predict for my future self. All of these thoughts of remorse. I got this when I was in my stage of discovery. And now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live. I remember when I was 15, I would wander alone at 2 a.m. and everything was so generic. Nowhere felt like home. I saw things that were not there, a different reality. I felt eerie and alone. I died during those nights. I felt like a criminal, but where was my record? I can't talk without flinching now. I used to be this healthy blonde-haired boy with blue eyes, and in a few years, I have darker hair and darker eyes, half the body weight. Where did I leave off? I try to sleep, I try to clear my head, but the pressure won't go away. The pain and depression won't leave. Being me is this horrible disease that I was given. I think of this as I succumb to sleep, but I see a large intensity of black, yellow, white fuzz. It makes my mind fizzle and I can barely keep in the bounds of reality. It is as if the ringing in my ears and the fuzz in my vision is simply all of the demons in my head mocking me. I fall asleep, but I wake up quickly to bloody screams. Is any of this here? Am I brain damaged? No. Then why am I like this? I have these thoughts all in my head. I search for someone to relate to me. Everyone looks down upon me and no one can relate. As I try to read, suddenly my eyes look right through the words. When I look up, I see blue dots near the center of my vision. When I feel slightly calm, it gets hard to breathe, and I see bright dots in my vision. Nothing I do is enjoyable. So to me, we have a very, very mentally unwell, confused, depressed, just a sad, sad person when you read this. And again, like I said, it could be creative writing. It could have been just, a story. But I think it's more than that. I think there is a lot there to unpack and really shows us the depths of mental illness that Bryan was in. I also have to wonder about the visual and auditory disturbances that he's talking about. It almost sounds like he was experiencing, visual and auditory hallucinations. And we know, he was in his later teen years when writing this. That's a very vulnerable age for mental illnesses. And so I just have to wonder, was he having hallucinations? What exactly was going on? I don't think just severe OCD. I think there was more going on there. And I'll be interested to see if more of this comes out when he goes to trial, if he has some other mental illnesses that we just don't know about yet. And aside from also, substance abuse and the severe OCD. I think there's more, but we'll see, I guess. So in an earlier post, even before that, about 9 months before the one I just read, he wrote another pretty disturbing post. Again, he talks about feeling disconnected from reality, feeling overwhelmed by things such as visual snow, again, tinnitus, so that ringing in the ears, regret. He questions what might have brought this on for himself. Why was he experiencing these things, the visual snow, the ringing in the ears? And he wonders if this is from the post, if it were a result from PTSD or if it was perhaps drug induced. And he recounts mixing Depakote with Topamax, which sometimes are both used in bipolar. They're also used in like migraines, but I want to think it was more for some sort of mental health problems. But he talks about mixing, Depakote, Topamax with 16 extra strength Mucinex pills. There is no dosing that I know of. No, I'm just kidding. There is definitely no dosing where you should be taking 16 of anything. But he said he mixed Depakote with Topamax and 16 Mucinex pills. He acknowledges that he felt, these feelings before taking all of these medications. But he also says in this post that he's wondering if either the drugs, exacerbated the symptoms, made them worse, or if they had anything to do at all with the symptoms that he was experiencing. And, we know that this is absolutely possible. It's really actually quite common for drug use to either exacerbate a mental illness or even bring forward a latent mental health problem. And it's why it's always, it's risky anytime that you do any kind of drugs. If you have some kind of latent mental health problem, you can bring that, forward. We also know, of course, that he was, battling his addiction to H. And so was he mixing this? And anytime that you hear someone taking 16 pills of any kind, we wonder, more than just self-medicating, was this an attempt to unalive himself? And so it's just a question that I have. He clearly was battling some really dark demons, though. And also, I think it's important to point out that he wrote this post when he was only 15 years old. That's a very young, again, vulnerable age. And these are really, really profound topics that he's talking about. I think it not only shows how mentally unwell he was, but also it does, in a way, reflect his intelligence, because these, like I said, these are very complex thoughts that he was putting down on paper or typing, whatever. And so, I think it does too show us, how intelligent Bryan is, obviously. I mean, he was working towards his PhD when he was arrested. In another post written by him again, he lists his own mental experiences, again, like he was almost trying to figure out what was wrong with him or self-diagnose. And he's listing off, these symptoms that he's experiencing. So he says, I always feel as if I'm not there, completely depersonalized. Mentally, I experience fog, lack of comprehension. I feel like my life is a movie or depersonalization. I'm depressed, no interest in activities, constant thoughts of unaliving, crazy thoughts, delusions of grandeur, anxiety, poor self-image, poor social skills, no emotion, in all caps lock. I feel like nothing has a point to it, and when I get home, I am mean to my family. This started when VS did. I think he's saying visual snow. I'll see if I can find a little something to give an example of what visual snow is. I felt no emotion, and along with the depersonalization, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. Everyone hates me. Pretty much, I'm an asshole. So, I mean, he's really, really not feeling good about himself, really struggling with some very serious stuff. And I think just from what we can see here, if these are accurately depicting what he was experiencing, I'm not trying to diagnose him by any means, but to me, it seems like he was struggling with some sort of personality disorder. So in order for a person to receive a personality disorder diagnosis, this is according to the DSM, they have to experience the following: an enduring pattern of inner experiences and behaviors that deviate from the expectations of whatever culture, and it's manifested in two or more of the following ways, including cognition, for example, how they perceive or interpret their self, other people, or events, their affect, so the range of emotional response, their interpersonal functioning, their impulse control, so it has to manifest in two or more of those areas. And so these patterns then must also be long-lasting, cause significant distress, impairment in either social, occupational, or other important areas of function. Check, check, check. Bryan definitely can check off all those boxes. So that's just the umbrella diagnosis for personality disorder. Of course, there are various personality disorders. OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, does fall under that umbrella, but there's also, borderline, there's antisocial, there's schizoid, there's various different personality disorders. I think maybe he was battling some other mental health disorders aside from just, the severe OCD. And then I found one other post where Bryan does discuss his struggles, or more so, his mental health struggles. Well, I shouldn't say he raps about his mental health. If you haven't heard this, it's pretty interesting. Looks like some people vetted it, and it does appear that it was Bryan himself that put a rap together. Yeah, he wrote it 11 years ago. I had to double check that. But it's definitely worth taking a listen to. I tried to get the lyrics as accurately as I could. If you listen to the rap and you hear something else, or you have some corrections for the lyrics, then go ahead and leave them in the comments down below. But I am going to put what I think the lyrics are up on the screen, and you can take a listen and let me know for yourself.
Always the same thing that disrupts my life. Wonder when I'll change. I guess when the time is right. Procrastinating, mind arranged to change would be a fight. So I'm pacifist, like I'm afraid to get a bloody fist. Look at this, my mind is pissed and I keep running. Why is this? When I hit it, always lose them stunning. Always gentle giant, no defiance, all build an alliance, and still think that I am peasant. I stuck in the future, but I'm never looking at the fucking present. Keep it up, act like you're all that. Here's a cookie too and a present. Led from a desert eagle, deagles going louder than my motherfucking beagle. And your life you get no sequel. Leave your loved ones crying like some seagulls. You are not my equal, you are evil, but I'm feeble. And now I'm going regal. Don't fuck with us. Hope you learn a lesson. Next on music.
And then also another piece of information that I found was in 2014, Michael, so that's Bryan's father, actually called the police on him because he said that Bryan had stolen one of his sister's phones. And it seems like this was likely in relation to his battle with addiction to H, but that was expunged from his record under the program for first-time offenders. But that is something that just kind of shows you too just what he was going through during his adolescence. But regardless, as you can see, I think it's pretty obvious that Bryan was a troubled teenager, and he really appeared to just have a lot of just dark and somewhat, twisted thoughts. And I bet you this is just scratching the surface. This is just what we can find. Imagine what we don't have access to. And I can only imagine that if this is how he was feeling and what his experiences were, he probably had a very difficult time, making any kind of meaningful relationships. I'm sure he had a hard time even in the home. I'm sure his parents were concerned for their son and for his future. We saw a lot of reports that he did experience, bullying in high school, and that he was just kind of awkward. There was a story I read in the New York Post where a girl said that he basically just approached her out of nowhere and said, like, want to hang out. And, that it's all fine, but when you look at everything as like a whole picture, it just seems like he really struggled with making any real personal connections. He definitely wasn't, very outgoing. Again, a target from a lot of bullies. And so I'm sure that there was a healthy level of concern from his parents for what, Bryan's future would hold. However, it really seemed to be turning around. Bryan went on to graduate from Pleasant Valley High School in 2013. He received his associates from the Northampton Community College in 2018, and that was in psychology. And then he went on to get his bachelor's in 2020 and his master's in 2022, both being criminal justice, and that was from DeSales University. And that was still located in Pennsylvania. And he took an obvious interest in criminology. He even participated in leading a crime research study while he was a student at DeSales. So the research study, it was posted on Reddit. We've likely all heard of it, but in case you haven't, I think it's pretty interesting. And so the beginning of it reads, "We are interested in understanding how emotions and psychological traits influence the decision-making involved in committing a crime." And so just a couple of questions here from the survey that he was part of. So one question was, at the time of the crime, did you struggle with or fight the victim? How was your life right before the crime occurred? Did you prepare for the crime before leaving your home? Please detail what you were thinking and feeling at this point. Why did you choose that victim or target over others? Before making your move, how did you approach the victim or target? Please detail what you were thinking and feeling. How did you leave the scene? And after committing the crime, what were you thinking and feeling? And so those are just some of the questions, but you can read through the rest of them here if you want. It's pretty interesting to read, I think, especially in light of course, what we know about Bryan and what he's being charged for. Some even believe that Bryan was attempting to, gain insight on how to go about committing a crime without getting caught. Or maybe he was trying to, feed this craving he was having to commit a crime, by almost living vicariously through others' experiences. And so any way you look at it, it's interesting to think about. But back to Bryan's education, because he was, very academically successful. Even one of his criminology professors, Michelle Bolger, described him as brilliant. And she said that he was one of only 2 students that she had ever recommended for the PhD program. So, Bryan didn't stop there. And in the summer of 2022, Bryan moved all the way from Pennsylvania to Washington State to pursue a PhD in criminology. And that was from the Washington State University. So that August, he even took a position as a teacher's assistant in the criminology department. And this was part of his doctoral program. And so from the outside looking in, he was turning into a really successful adult. And, perhaps maybe his family was hopeful that he would have this happy future after all. Perhaps, even Bryan was feeling for a moment there that things were going to turn around for him and that he was going to have a successful life. However, it is reported that not even a month into his assistant teaching position, he was under investigation from the staff at Washington State University for behavioral problems and sexist behaviors towards women. So female students were saying that Bryan was not only rude to them, but he was behaving sexist towards them, grading them differently from the male students. And he was also reportedly having multiple altercations with one of the professors there. That would be Professor John Snyder. And so Professor Snyder, he had multiple meetings with Bryan, discussing ways that Bryan was expected to improve his behaviors. But ultimately, Bryan reportedly kept arguing or being belligerent with the professor. And so on December 19th, 2022, Bryan was ultimately fired from his teaching assistant position. So December 19th, this is, a little over a month after the homicides. And he just kept having episode after episode where he was getting into these arguments with the professors. And you have to wonder, was something going on behind the scenes, something big, something serious that was really causing Bryan to kind of spiral out of control in his academic career. But Bryan wouldn't actually be at Washington State University when he was fired from his position. He was actually back home in Pennsylvania because on December 15th, so this is 4 days prior, he would make the long drive back from Washington State all the way to his home state of Pennsylvania. but he wouldn't do it alone. His father actually flew out to Washington State to make the drive with him. Allegedly, this was something that they had planned for months. I wonder, maybe Bryan did have this planned out, that he was going to have his father fly back, but you do have to wonder why a 28-year-old man would have his father fly all the way there, who was pushing 70 years old, to make this cross-country drive. It could have been he just wanted to spend time with him, but in light, again, of everything, it seems like there could have been more of a motive there. And unknown to the public, but at this time, the authorities were tracking Bryan and considered him the prime suspect in the Idaho murders. And so they were keeping a close eye on Bryan, so much so that they actually pulled him over not once but twice while driving from Washington State to Pennsylvania. Both times for allegedly driving too close to a car in front of him. So some have said that the officers were instructed to do so by the FBI in order to get a good look at him, determine what his destination was.
There was a mass shooting and everything.
Where?
This was essentially what ended up happening
Interesting.
Well, it's horrifying because he's going to the university, you know what I mean?
So y'all work at the university there?
I actually do work there.
Oh.
PhD in criminal
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that incident. Just yesterday, or?
This happened this morning. About an hour and a half ago. They're still wrapping it up for investigating. I'm not sure there's two shootings because they did shoot somebody.
I see.
And then you don't know about that actually. They were there with shooting out of the window or something.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So do me a favor, don't follow too close, okay?
State police got your license and registration. I stopped you, man, when you were driving by me there. You were a little too close to the back of that semi. One car between you and the back of this trailer. We're about one car going 10 miles an hour. So we're going 60 or 70 miles an hour. We're about 6 or 7 cars. It was a county guy. Was it like a black SUV? Okay, all right. And you thought you guys were following too closely? Well, I'm not going to give you guys another ticket or warning if you just got stopped. Just make sure you give yourself plenty of room, okay? So like I said, it's all about how fast you're going, okay? So, where are you up to? Where at? Yeah, it's a long haul. You guys scared of airplanes?
In my opinion, looking at the police camera, Bryan does appear nervous to me in the first video, where you can actually see his face. Of course, the second one, we really can't see his face. And it seems bizarre to me how the dad, Mike, how he's behaving and what he's saying. It's almost like he's just like nervously oversharing and trying to distract, from the Idaho murders by bringing up this smaller Washington State shooting, I guess, that had happened. He seems nervous to me. At this point, we have to believe that Bryan's dad, obviously Bryan, knew that the authorities were on the lookout for this white Elantra, which of course, was the car that they were driving. And we know that Bryan lived in close proximity to the house where the murders took place. Mike, the father, he knows Bryan. He knows his struggles with mental health. He knows his behaviors. He knows his past, if he's upset or not. And so here they are, getting pulled over multiple times for driving, again, too close to other vehicles on this cross-country drive that Mike is accompanying his 28-year-old son. And so I personally really do think deep down Mike was suspicious of Bryan, and whether or not he could have had anything to do with the quadruple homicide. Who knows if he would have, he'd ever admit it to the public or even to himself. I'm sure that's an extremely hard pill to swallow. But just in light of everything, with all of those details, if you think about it, you do have to wonder, if Mike was suspicious. And, if Bryan is the guy, obviously, he's right now innocent until proven guilty. But if he is the guy, I'm sure he was behaving very nervously when he was getting pulled over these couple of times, wondering, like, is this it? Is this me getting arrested? And so dads know their sons, parents know their sons, moms, fathers. And so if he was behaving nervous or seeming on edge, I'm sure his dad was picking up on something. I really have to think deep down that at this point, Mike was very suspicious of Bryan. Regardless, on December 30th, 2022, an arrest was made in relation to the Idaho murders, and it was none other than Bryan Kohberger. So with his arrest, again, many questions arose, and perhaps the biggest one of all was, why did authorities suspect that Bryan was the killer? And this question, amongst others, were answered in this shocking affidavit that was released. So in the 18-page affidavit provided by Brett Payne of the Moscow Police Department, we do learn multiple key points. One, we learned the locations of the victims. So the King residence, it was 3 stories. Xana and Ethan were found on the 2nd floor in Xana's bedroom, with Xana being on the floor. And then both Kaylee and Maddie were found on the 3rd floor, both of them laying in Maddie's bed. Also noted that Kaylee's dog was found on the 3rd floor as well, locked in another bedroom, I believe what was once Kaylee's room. 2, we learned that Xana received a DoorDash at about 4 a.m. and that she was on TikTok at about 4:12 a.m. 3, we learned that one of the surviving roommates, Dylan, who was also on the 2nd floor, so the same floor as Xana and Ethan, she actually heard commotion the night of the homicide. So first, at about 4 a.m., Dylan was woke up from what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog upstairs. And then shortly after that, Dylan thought she heard Kaylee say, "There's someone here." However, it's now believed that this was actually likely Xana, because we know that she was awake at this time and she was on the same floor as Dylan. Dylan says she looked out her room at this time, says she saw nothing, and then shortly after that she heard what she thought was crying from Xana's room. Again, she looked out the door, but she says she saw nothing. Shortly after that, Dylan heard a man say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan said she opened her door for the 3rd time after she heard crying, and she saw a figure clad in black with a mask on covering the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. She described the figure as 5'10" or even taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past her, as Dylan says, stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the backsliding door, and Dylan says she locked herself in her room. The 4th key detail that we learn is that the killer had left behind a knife sheath located on Maddie's bed just right of her body. The sheath had a K-bar, a USMC, and the U.S. Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. And perhaps one of the biggest breakthroughs of all would be that a single source of male DNA was discovered on the button snap of the sheet. A 5th key detail is that we learned a video canvas was done to obtain any footage from the early morning hours of November 13th, and quite a bit was captured. So about 4:17 a.m., we learned that a security camera just northwest of the King residence picked up distorted audio of what sounded either like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking at this time. Also, we see a white sedan, which was later identified as either 2011 through 2016 Hyundai Elantra without a front license plate. And this is seen passing the King residence 3 times before stopping a 4th time at about 4:04 a.m. And then at 4:20 a.m., that same car is seen leaving the area at a very high rate of speed. The 6th key detail is that we learn a Washington State University police officer looked up white Elantras on campus and identified Bryan Kohberger, who matched the description given by Dylan. And from there, we learned that Bryan was originally from Pennsylvania, where they actually do not require front license plates like they do in Washington. And then actually on November 18th, just 5 days after the murders took place, Bryan registers his car with Washington and now receives a front license plate. The seventh detail, we learned that as part of their investigation, a search warrant was granted for Bryan's phone records, and the discoveries made here, I think, are very unsettling. So on the 13th of November, the morning of the homicides, at about 2:42 a.m., Bryan's phone pings at his own residence in Washington. However, at 2:47 a.m., based on cell tower data, Bryan's phone travels southeast from his residence, and then at about 2:47, the phone stops reporting to the network and does not report again until 4:48 a.m. And this is consistent with either the phone being turned off or being in a location without cellular coverage. And then at about 9 a.m., his phone shows that he began traveling towards Moscow, Idaho, and pings on a tower that covers the King residence between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m. After this, Officer Payne was granted a search warrant for Kohberger's phone data dating back to June 2022 to, determine if he was actually stalking any of the victims. And this is honestly when it gets even more eerie. So Kohberger's phone used cellular resources that provided coverage to the King residence at least 12 additional times, all of which occurred in the late evening or early morning hours except one time. And then finally, on December 27th, 2022, we learned that Pennsylvania agents recovered trash outside of Kohberger's family home, and the DNA from the trash was compared to the single DNA found on the knife sheath's snap. And would you believe it? It was determined that it was 99.9998% likely that the DNA found on the piece of trash was the biological father of the DNA found on the knife sheath. All of that mounting evidence, Officer Brett Payne was granted an arrest warrant for burglary and 4 counts of murder in the first degree. And so the police raided Bryan's family home in Pennsylvania at about 1:30 a.m. on December 30th and actually found Bryan Kohberger awake in his kitchen wearing latex gloves, sifting through the trash and putting it into individual Ziploc bags. Talk about looking guilty. The district attorney actually thinks that this might be why they were only able to find the father's DNA in the trash. He thinks that maybe Bryan had been sifting through the trash and basically taking out any trash that he thought might have his own DNA on it. But yeah, when the officers showed up to arrest Bryan Kohberger, he was wearing gloves in the kitchen, sifting through trash. It didn't look good for him. Still, even though so many questions were answered in the affidavit, just as many questions still remain. One big question that people are asking is why it took so long for the surviving roommates to call 911. So now we know just before 4:20, Dylan saw, this masked man walking out their sliding door, and she said she stood in this frozen shock phase, locked herself in her bedroom. Well, police weren't actually called until 11:58 a.m. So nearly 8 hours after the homicides actually took place. And a lot of people are asking, why did it take so long for someone to call 911? So it's reported at first that the 2 roommates called friends over to their house before calling 911 because they thought that somebody on the second floor was passed out. And then shortly after this, the 911 call was made using allegedly one of the roommates' phones, requesting help for, quote, an unconscious person. It is said that the phone was passed around between various people during this 911 call, but it's still unclear what any of the individuals actually knew before calling 911. One does have to assume that whoever did call 911 didn't know the extent of the injuries if the verbiage that they used was an unconscious person. It's obvious that this is one of those details of the case that there's a lot of stuff we don't know. A lot has not been released to the public. Obviously, we know that the audio of the 911 call has not been released to the public, and I'm sure there's just a lot of details surrounding this 911 call that we have no idea about. Some have speculated that, either Xana or Ethan's bodies were blocking Xana's door from being open. Perhaps Xana's body, because we know that the affidavit says that she was found on the ground. And so maybe, someone tried to look underneath the door and could see someone laying on the floor. Maybe they thought that they were just unconscious. Others have speculated that the unconscious person in question was actually someone else that had passed out after seeing one of the 4 slain students. And yeah, there are just tons of questions surrounding this. I'm sure we'll get our answers come trial, but right now, we're just going to have to guess. Another looming question is whether or not Bryan was targeting any of the victims or if it was just a random act of terror. So there have been speculations that Kohberger was either targeting Kaylee or Maddie, and that, Xana and Ethan were just collateral damage. For instance, early on, Kaylee's family came out and said that they did some digging on social media immediately after they were given Bryan's name, and they did find an Instagram profile that they believe could have belonged to Kohberger. So according to Kaylee's parents, the profile was not only following the girls, but it also liked many of Kaylee and Maddie's pictures. However, this was later on said to likely have been made by someone else that was impersonating Kohberger. I think we don't know the truth there. Maybe that is all accurate, and because of the gag order and everything, they don't want that information out. Or maybe it really was somebody impersonating Kohberger. I don't think we're going to find out the truth again until this goes to trial. And also it said that, both Maddie and Xana were working at a restaurant called the Mad Greek. And this was known to have vegan options on the menu. And this is important because Kohberger was allegedly a very strict vegan, so much so that he would even refuse to eat out of pots and pans that had ever touched meat. And so it's believed that, Kohberger visited the Mad Greek and may have encountered one of the girls there. And so, yeah, a lot of speculation going on, a lot of questions still do remain. And again, I don't think we're going to ever know at least most of the truth until this goes to trial. So where is the case now? So this is almost 19 months from the quadruple homicide, almost 18 months after Bryan has been arrested. And there are some key points or highlights that I think are worth going over with you guys. So on January 4th, Bryan was extradited back to Moscow, Idaho from his family home in Pennsylvania, where he is currently being held without bail. And then May 2023, Kohberger refused to enter a plea during his arraignment. He instead stood silent, forcing the judge to enter a not guilty plea for him. So, this made people question why Bryan would choose to stand silent. What's the benefit of doing so? Some people believe that he chose to do this in order to, kind of remain neutral. And this, I guess, perhaps could avoid upsetting the victims' families anymore, by outright denying any kind of involvement in the murders. Some believe it's, a tactic by Bryan to, almost remain defiant or attempt to showcase, his intelligence. And then there's another theory that it gives him the opportunity to change his plea or accept a plea bargain in the future if they should decide to seek the death penalty, which, lo and behold, we know that in June 2023, the prosecutors announced that they would be seeking the death penalty against Bryan Kohberger. And, a lot of people speculate that this could really happen, that he could really receive, this capital punishment, especially because we haven't heard of any alibi. Well, we have heard of an alibi now. At the time of them saying that they were seeking capital punishment, they hadn't heard an alibi from them. But in April 2024, Bryan did finally give his alibi as to where he was on the morning of the killings. Like, I say alibi loosely because his alibi is that he was out driving that late night, early morning, looking at the moon and stars. Apparently, this is something that he says he did often, that he was so busy with school he could no longer go for walks or hikes or whatever it was that he typically enjoyed. And so instead, he started doing these late night drives, 4 a.m. drives. I mean, that's pretty bizarre, across state lines, apparently, to look at the moon and stars. So that is his alibi. And there's, of course, no one that can corroborate his story. It'll be interesting to see, if he has any pictures or anything from that night of the night sky. I don't know, but that is his, alibi. Also, since, the story has broke of Bryan Kohberger allegedly being the sole perpetrator of this quadruple homicide, there have been multiple people that have come forward with their experiences or encounters with Bryan. Some people described him again as like a loner or just flying under the radar. Some people said he was creepy. Some people said he was aggressive. But multiple people have come forward, which helps, again, paint, more of a picture of Bryan and who he was.
And there he is, and he led this project. 11/16/18. Now, I want to make it clear. This was not a close friend. This was a guy I did a project with, and my first impression of him was he's a little odd, but he's a nice guy. Does not stand out, but he blended in. Like, he was a pretty normal guy, and he does not look like a normal guy now. He looks so skinny and so threatening. I'm shocked. I am completely shocked. But rotten hell if it was you.
Even if he had a run-in in a bar, that would not have been anything unusual or even really noteworthy. Not until hindsight.
According to multiple reports, Kohberger frequented the brewery Seven Sirens while he attended college in the area. According to the interviews, Kohberger made multiple women uncomfortable, so much so that a record of his interactions was kept, noting that he made staff concerned about his strange behavior. We reached out to the Seven Sirens owner multiple times and never received a response.
I recognized him immediately, and my heart just sank because I couldn't believe that I was face to face with this guy.
Nurse Haley Willett says they met on Tinder in 2015 when they were both psych majors at Pennsylvania colleges. He took her to a movie, then insisted on escorting her to her dorm room.
I was kind of afraid to say no, so I just let him come in with me.
Then he did something she says she'll never forget.
He kept trying to tickle me, and I would ask him to stop, or I'd say, "What are you doing?" And he would be like, I'm not tickling you. And he would get very serious.
Creeped out by Kohberger, she came up with a clever ruse.
I proceeded to pretend to throw up in the bathroom, hoping that, that would gross him out and he would leave.
Did it work?
Yeah. He had messaged me on Tinder and said that he was leaving and that he had a good time and that he would message me later. And then about an hour later, he messaged me and he said that I had good birthing hips, and I just never messaged him back after that.
After what happened to the 4 Idaho students, Haley thinks she had a lucky escape.
It could have been me.
And because basically it seems virtually impossible that at this point no one is unfamiliar with the case, there is a legitimate concern that we won't be able to have an unbiased jury in the trial against Bryan Kohberger. So to try and mitigate this, the judge, which coincidentally is named Judge, out of Latah County District Court, put a gag order in place. So this prevents prosecutors, defense lawyers, attorneys for victims, families, witnesses from saying anything publicly aside from what's already out on public record. And so the idea of the gag order is to try and balance the First Amendment right with free speech with the Sixth Amendment right for a defendant to receive a fair trial. The concern is that, too much commentary or publicity can create a jury that already has their mind made up. And you can see, however, even with a gag order in place, this is going to be a very difficult feat. And so because of this concern for a biased jury, Bryan's attorney, Ann Taylor, has been pushing to move the trial out of Latah County. So in an attempt to do so, to prove that a jury out of Latah County is going to be biased, she actually conducted a survey of potential jurors. And this has actually caused a lot of backfire against Taylor, including Judge being pretty upset because not only did he not approve of the survey, but it could be found in violation of his gag order. The questions, in my opinion, they could be very leading and do the exact opposite of what Taylor says she's trying to avoid in creating a biased jury. I'll let you take a look at these questions. There's 9 questions. You can tell me what you think. The first question is, have you read, seen, or heard if Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home? 2, have you read, seen, or heard if police found a knife sheath on the bed next to one of the victims? 3, have you read, seen, or heard that DNA found on the knife matched Bryan Kohberger? 4, have you read, seen, or heard if Bryan Kohberger owned the same type of car recorded on video driving in the neighborhood where the killings occurred? 5, have you read, seen, or heard if the cell phone tower data showed that Bryan Kohberger made several trips near the victim's home in the month before the killing? 6, have you read, seen, or heard if university students of Moscow and their parents lived in fear until Bryan was arrested? 7, have you read, seen, or heard that Bryan said he was out driving alone on the night of the murders? 8, have you read, seen, or heard Bryan stalked one of his victims? And then finally 9, have you read, seen, or heard if Bryan Kohberger had followed one of the victims on social media? Now, I'm no attorney, but if I was really trying to avoid a biased jury, one that could potentially harm my client and their access, to a fair trial, I don't think I would be asking these types of questions. In fact, I really think asking these types of questions to potential jurors could do, the exact opposite. Like, what if they hadn't heard that Bryan had stalked one of the victims? Well, now they had. Or maybe they hadn't heard before that Bryan had made several trips, near the home, the King residence. Well, now, they have. And so essentially, really, these types of questions I feel like could be injecting the minds of these jurors with these ideas. And so part of me has to wonder, was this intentional? Was Taylor intentionally trying to inject these potential jurors out of Latah County with these ideas of Bryan in a weird roundabout way to actually get the trial moved out of Latah County? And it's kind of in the realm of like a conspiracy theory. I tend to not be a conspiracy theorist. I like to avoid, that type of thinking. But I do wonder, when she allowed this survey, and I know she actually says that she didn't approve of the specific questions. I question if that's true or not, but I just have to wonder, what was the exact motive here when asking those questions? Because if it was to try and show that, potential jurors were going to be biased, I don't think that was what happened. I think really, if anything else, it would have created even a larger bias. Does that make sense? I don't know. If you have any insight on that, I would like to hear your opinions, because to me, I just think it's kind of backwards thinking. All right, you guys, I know that maybe not everyone is going to agree with me, because there are still some people out there that actually do think that, Bryan Kohberger is innocent. I personally, in my own opinion, after reading through everything, I really do believe that he is the guy. Based on the evidence that we have now, assuming that it's truthful. Again, I'm not the type of person that is a conspiracy theorist. I like to look at the facts. I mean, now, if you were to believe that everything is a lie and that people are lying to you and this is a cover-up, then you could go down that rabbit hole if he's not the guy. But if you believe what we have so far, and this, I think, is only a tip of the iceberg of what we have against Bryan Kohberger, then I definitely think he is the guy. Of course, he's innocent until proven guilty. I still think, no matter what, he deserves a fair trial. But as of where I stand now, I think that he is the guy. And that's also not to say that my mind couldn't be changed. When we go to trial, when we learn more, I definitely actively try and keep an open mind. And so my mind can be changed. If some more evidence is shown and he really does have, a good alibi, or there's some kind of proof that comes out that he wasn't, the perpetrator, my mind can absolutely be changed. But as it stands right now, like I said, I think he is the guy. There's just too many, coincidences that point to him. With his phone pinging near the King residence about at least 13 times that we know of, to him driving the same type of vehicle that we saw on camera multiple times, basically, casing the house, the night of the actual homicides. The fact that he got a new license plate just 5 days after the murders took place. Of course, the single source DNA on the knife sheath matching the DNA of his father. That's like 99.9998% accurate. I mean, that's a big one. And then not to mention the fact that when they found him, when they raided his parents' house, he was in the kitchen, going through his garbage and gloves and sorting through it. Some people say this is just because he's OCD, but why then in the middle of the night? That to me, I don't believe that that was just a symptom of his OCD. I think he was trying to hide some kind of evidence. And also, I keep going back to the fact that he stood silent when he was to enter a plea. If he wasn't guilty, why wouldn't he plead not guilty? Like I mean, maybe his attorneys were pushing him to stand silent, and but I have to think again, if I were being charged or accused of doing this horrific crime, having families there crying, mourning their children, and I was being accused of killing them, I don't care if it's like my freedom is on the line. I'm going to the grave saying I'm not guilty. I'm not standing silent. I'm not doing anything else. I'm not guilty, and I'm saying I'm not guilty. So I mean, I can't say for certain that he wasn't pushed to do that, and I don't know, but I know if it were me, I would be willing to risk it all and say that I'm not guilty if I truly was not guilty. So I think it's interesting. Everybody has different theories, of course, on what happened. I have my own theory. Again, like I said, I'm open-minded. I'm willing to change my mind if more evidence comes out. But right now, I do have a theory as to what I think happened. Again, it's just theory, speculation. He's innocent until proven guilty, all that stuff. But I do have a theory as to what I think happened, and I thought I'd share it with you guys to finally close out this episode. And if you have a theory, definitely leave it in the comments below. I'm interested to read. And trust me, I read through all of those comments. I am so interested to hear what you guys think too. My theory is that Bryan, like I said, is the perpetrator, and he was motivated by three things. His hatred for women, or maybe, even maybe not necessarily just hatred, but like a frustration surrounding women, his lack of success with them. 2, his curiosity surrounding, criminality, maybe even more specifically murder, but definitely curiosity with crime. I honestly really do think that he had a fascination with crime, and perhaps he really wanted to know what it felt like to even take a life, as morbid as that sounds. I think that he probably tried to suppress these feelings for a really long time, and eventually he just kind of gave in to the urge. I think this could have been a large factor as to why he did pursue criminology, because like I said, I think he was fascinated with crime. And so studying in the field kind of gave him some almost like relief for his desires, I guess you could say. But ultimately, it just wasn't enough to satisfy, his curiosity. And then 3, I think he wanted to be able to, I guess, almost outsmart the justice system. I think he really thought he could get away with murder. And in all reality, he did do, a lot of things, so to speak, right in regards to covering his tracks. But the hard truth is he just wasn't smart enough to outrun the law, and he just didn't account for human error. Perhaps, his biggest error being that he left that knife sheath behind. And I think when they saw that his phone pinged back at the house in 912 or whatever it was, maybe he was looking to see if he dropped the sheath outside the home. Maybe he was just going back to the house to kind of revel in what he had done and see why, it hadn't been all over the news yet or something. But I have to wonder if he was trying to go back for the sheath. Because I think what happened was when he finally found himself in the moment, he took out the knife, he dropped the sheath, and he was just caught up in the adrenaline of everything. That I think he might not have even either realized that he dropped it. It's just a lot going on at once. I think he was basically caught off guard. I do believe that he was targeting just one girl. I personally think he was targeting Maddie, and that maybe he didn't expect to find Kaylee in the same bed as her. In which case, you would have to think that he would be, having to act pretty fast, because now instead of just one person, he has 2 people that he has to handle. And so, of course, he thought he had everything planned out, but when it came down to it, the actual act itself was a lot more chaotic than he could have ever planned, causing him to thankfully make the mistake of dropping the knife sheath, because that DNA, I think, is going to be pivotal in this case. Or maybe, he did realize that he dropped the sheath, but, he heard movements downstairs and he panicked, forcing him to just leave quickly. We know that Xana was up getting a DoorDash delivery. She was on TikTok. We know that, Dylan was waking up and hearing some kind of commotion. So maybe he heard sounds and he just panicked and thought he had to get out of there. I think that Xana was definitely collateral damage as well. Maybe she had left her room or something. She went to go get napkins or something else to help, eat the food that she had just had delivered. And that's when she discovered Bryan. I think that's probably when Dylan heard someone say, there's someone here. I think that was Xana. Maybe, Kohberger followed her back to her room. She was maybe trying to get Ethan's attention, but Ethan was asleep. And so he didn't put up, his best fight against Kohberger because he was basically just waking up or asleep. And so Kohberger took advantage of this and he acted really quickly and took Ethan's life. I think that Xana likely did see, the tragic murder of Ethan, and she was crying or whimpering, obviously extremely upset. I think that Dylan, when she heard someone say, it's okay, I'm going to help you, I think that was Kohberger. I think it was almost like an attempt to, one, quiet her down because he was nervous for being caught, but also maybe he was even trying to calm her nerves a bit, even though he knew what he was going to do. And we know that Xana fought really hard for her life based on her very severe defensive wounds. And she was ultimately the last person that was killed out of the 4. And then I think that loud thud that was picked up on the nearby security system, I think that was Xana's body essentially hitting the floor after she eventually, unfortunately and tragically, lost the battle against Bryan. I also think that this commotion, because like I said, she put up such a good fight, is what startled the dog upstairs, making him bark, which we know was also picked up on the security system nearby. And then I think when Dylan opened the door one last time and she saw Bryan now, or the alleged killer, walking out and leaving, I think that he was just done. I think he had killed way more people than he had ever planned for, and he was just looking to book it out of there. He was likely tired because that was, I'm sure, a very difficult feat for him. I think he was also afraid that he had been there way too long, way longer than he had planned, and he was afraid of essentially getting caught in the act. And, Xana had put up, like I said, it seems like a very hard fight. And this caused a lot of commotion. The dog was barking. Another roommate was opening their door. It was all too much. And essentially, Bryan was just afraid of getting caught. So much so that not only did he run out of the house, but he sped off in his car. And yeah, that's my theory as to what I think happened. Again, it's just a theory. It's speculation. I'm sure that it's not completely accurate, or it may be completely inaccurate. We'll find out more when the trial comes. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think, any theories that you have. Obviously, keep it nice in the comments, but definitely I want it to be a place where you can share your opinions and have a discussion. And I'm really interested just to see what happens. I will be following this trial very closely, so there will definitely be more videos to come on this. Again, Bryan is innocent until proven guilty. I do hope that if we do determine that he is the guy beyond reasonable doubt, then I hope that justice is served to the max of the law. If he's innocent, I obviously hope that he walks free. Regardless of what happens, I hope ultimately that the families of the victims can receive some kind of justice, some kind of closure, and eventually start moving towards some kind of recovery, whatever that might look like for them. I'm sure you never ever heal from this, but hopefully they can at least start putting the trial behind them. Anyways, like I said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Don't forget, if you did like the video, then subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video in the future, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye.